My friends think I'm broken. They see a 76-year-old woman who hasn't dated in 15 years, and they whisper behind their coffee cups at the church social. Poor Dorothy, they say. She's given up on love. What they don't understand is that I haven't given up on anything. I found something better. I found myself. It wasn't always this way. For 61 years of my life, I measured my worth by the man sitting next to me. First my father, then my husband Richard, then a parade of men who came and went like seasons. Each one took a piece of me with them when they left. By the time I turned 61, I was just fragments of what other people needed me to be. Richard died on a Tuesday. Cancer took him slowly, like it was savoring each moment. I spent 2 years watching him fade away, holding his hand through chemotherapy sessions, sleeping in hospital chairs that left permanent aches in my back. When he finally let go, the silence in our house was so thick I could taste it. Metallic, empty, like the inside of a tin can. The funeral was on a Friday. By Monday, my sister Carol was already talking about getting me back out there. She meant well. They all did. But they couldn't understand that I wasn't mourning just Richard. I was mourning the version of myself that died with him. The woman who made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, who chose her clothes based on his compliments, who never watched the movies she wanted to see because he didn't like subtitles. 6 months after the funeral, Carol set me up with her neighbor's brother, Harold. He was 73, retired from the post office, and still wore his wedding ring even though his wife had been gone for 3 years. We met at Denny's. He ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Pot roast for him, chicken salad for me. Women your age need to watch their cholesterol, he said, like he'd known me for decades instead of 20 minutes. I ate the chicken salad. I smiled when he talked about his model trains. I laughed at his jokes about women drivers. And when he walked me to my car and asked if he could see me again, I said yes, because that's what I'd been trained to do my whole life. Say yes. Be agreeable. Be what someone else needed. We dated for 8 months. 8 months of dinners I didn't choose, movies I didn't want to see, and conversations about his dead wife that went on so long I started to feel like I was dating a ghost. He never asked about Richard, never asked what I liked to do, never asked what I thought about anything that mattered. I was just a warm body to fill the empty space where his loneliness lived. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening in October. We were at his house watching a football game I had no interest in when he got up to get another beer. "Dorothy," he called from the kitchen, "bring me the remote, and while you're up, see if there are any more of those chips." Not a request, a command, like I was hired help. I looked at that remote in my hands, and something cracked open inside me. Not broken, awakened. I set it down on the coffee table and walked out. No explanation, no argument, no apology. I just left. He called 17 times that night. 17. I counted. Each ring sounded like a chain rattling, trying to pull me back into a cage I just discovered I'd been living in my whole life. I unplugged the phone and went to bed. Most people walk away when stories get this heavy. The fact that you're still listening, that means something. Hit subscribe. I've got more to tell. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my bedroom window. Not just any birds, cardinals. 3 of them, bright red against the yellow maple tree in my backyard. I'd lived in that house for 34 years, and I'd never noticed how they sang in the morning, because I'd always been too busy making coffee for someone else, getting ready to meet someone else's schedule, thinking about someone else's needs. I made coffee for one that morning, strong, black. the way I actually liked it, not the weak, cream-heavy version Richard had preferred. I sat at my kitchen table and watched those cardinals for an hour. When the phone started ringing again around 9, I didn't even look at it. Carol showed up around noon with a casserole and a lecture. Dorothy Blake, what has gotten into you? Harold called me this morning, worried sick. He said you just walked out without a word. That's not like you. She was right. It wasn't like me. The old me would have apologized, made excuses, maybe even gone back with flowers and a promise to be better. But sitting there, looking at my sister's concerned face, I realized something that changed everything. I didn't want to be the old me anymore. I'm done, Carol, I said. Done with what? Done pretending. Done shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. Done saying yes when I mean no. Done being what everyone else needs instead of who I am. She stared at me like I'd sprouted a second head. But Dorothy, you can't just give up on companionship. You're going to get lonely. Lonely. That word had been hanging over my head like a storm cloud since Richard died. Everyone was so afraid I'd be lonely. But as I sat there in my kitchen, drinking my coffee exactly the way I liked it, watching cardinals through my window, I realized something profound. I hadn't been lonely since Harold stopped calling. I'd been peaceful. The next few months were like learning to walk again. I had to remember who I was when nobody else was watching. I started small. I rearranged the living room furniture the way I'd always wanted it, with the couch facing the window instead of the television. I bought books Richard would have called silly. Mysteries with female detectives, romance novels with happy endings, poetry collections that made me cry in the best way. I started taking long walks through the neighborhood, really seeing it for the first time. Mrs. Henderson's garden had roses that bloomed until October. The Johnsons had painted their front door a cheerful yellow that reminded me of sunshine. The old oak tree at the corner of Maple and 3rd had initials carved into its bark. Young love from decades past, now grown thick with age. I joined the book club at the library, something I'd wanted to do for years, but never had time for because I was always planning my schedule around someone else's. The first meeting was awkward. I sat in the back, said maybe 3 words the whole evening. But I was there. That mattered. By December, I was reading 2 books a week. By March, I was leading discussions. By June, 3 other women from the group had started joining me for lunch afterward. Real conversations about books, about life, about ideas. Not small talk about the weather or gossip about neighbors. Deep talks that fed something in my soul I hadn't even realized was starving. Someone once told me there are rules that change after 60. One of them says that acceptance after 60 is surrender. That one sentence changed my entire life. It's all in the description. The pressure to date started building again around my 70th birthday. Carol, bless her heart, couldn't understand how I could be happy alone. She'd bring up Harold occasionally, hinting that he was still single, still asking about me. Other friends would mention their widowed brothers, their divorced neighbors, like they were doing me some great favor. What about companionship? They'd ask. Don't you miss having someone to talk to? I wanted to laugh. I talked more in my book club meetings than I had in years of marriage to Richard. I had deeper conversations with my neighbor Margaret during our morning walks than I'd ever had with Harold. I was more myself in the grocery store, choosing exactly what I wanted for dinner than I'd been in decades of relationships where my preferences came second. The truth is, I'd never been less alone. When you stop trying to be what someone else needs, you finally have room to be who you are. And who I was, it turned out, was someone I actually liked spending time with. I started traveling. Small trips at first. Weekend visits to my cousin in Nashville, a week-long bus tour of New England in the fall, then bigger adventures. I spent 2 weeks in Ireland when I was 72, staying in bed and breakfasts and walking through countryside that looked like something from a fairy tale. I ate breakfast when I was hungry, not when someone else's schedule demanded. I spent hours in museums, reading every placard, taking my time. I talked to strangers in pubs and shared stories about home. On my last night in Dublin, I was sitting in a small restaurant near my hotel, eating dinner alone. A couple at the next table kept glancing over with that look. You know the one. Pity mixed with curiosity. The woman finally leaned over and asked if I was all right, if I needed company. She meant well. They always do. I'm perfect, I told her, and I meant it. I'm having dinner with someone I really enjoy. She looked confused, glancing around for my companion. Myself, I said, smiling. I'm having dinner with myself, and she's delightful company. That was 4 years ago. I haven't been on a date since. Haven't wanted to be. Not because I'm bitter or broken or afraid, because I'm complete. My friends still don't understand. Last month at the church potluck, Betty Morrison cornered me by the dessert table. Dorothy, honey, you know Martha's son just moved back to town. He's divorced. Very nice. Good job at the bank. I loaded my plate with 3 different kinds of cake, something I never would have done when I was worried about what some man might think about my figure, and smiled at her. Betty, I appreciate the thought, but I'm seeing someone. Her eyes lit up. Oh, who? A 76-year-old woman who reads mystery novels until 2 in the morning, takes bubble baths on Tuesday afternoons just because she can, and travels wherever she wants without asking anyone's permission. She's the most interesting person I've ever met. Betty looked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. The thing about being single at 76 is that people assume you're waiting for the right person to come along and complete you, waiting for someone to make your life meaningful again, waiting for love to find you one more time. What they don't understand is that I'm not waiting for anything. I'm living. I wake up every morning in a bed that's arranged exactly the way I like it. I drink my coffee black and strong while I read the newspaper cover to cover, including the parts Richard always said were boring. I tend to my garden, which now has more flowers than vegetables because I like pretty things and I don't care if they're practical. I listen to jazz music while I cook, something that used to give Richard headaches. I have dinner parties for my book club friends where we discuss everything from politics to poetry to the meaning of life. I take classes at the community college, art history, creative writing, Spanish. I'm learning things at 76 that I never had time for when I was busy being half of someone else's whole. Last Tuesday, I ran into Harold at the grocery store. He's been married for 2 years now to a widow from his church. She stood next to him while he picked out bananas, agreeing with everything he said, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. When he introduced us, she smiled that tight, careful smile I recognized from my own face in old photographs. The smile of a woman who's learned to make herself smaller. Dorothy's the one who got away, Harold told his wife, winking like we shared some secret. I looked at this woman, standing there in Harold's shadow, and wanted to tell her what I'd learned. That she wasn't half of anything. That she didn't have to shrink herself to fit into someone else's idea of what a woman should be. That there was a whole beautiful life waiting for her on the other side of all that people-pleasing. But you can't wake someone up who's pretending to sleep. She has to find her own way to morning. After everything I went through, I found the 60-year rule. It has 9 rules that explain exactly why everything I believed was wrong after 60. It changed how I see my family, my health, my money, everything. Check the description. People ask me if I'm lonely. They ask it with such concern, such certainty that I must be suffering somehow. What I want to tell them is that loneliness and being alone are two completely different things. Loneliness is feeling empty when you're surrounded by people who don't see you. Being alone is feeling full when you're surrounded by nothing but possibility. I'm not lonely. I'm selective. I choose who gets my time, my energy, my attention. And the first person I choose every single day is myself. That doesn't mean I don't love people. I love my sister Carol, even though she still doesn't understand my choices. I love my book club friends who've become the sisters I never knew I needed. I love my neighbor Margaret, who brings me tomatoes from her garden and listens to my stories about Ireland. I love the young couple next door, who sometimes asks me to watch their toddler while they go to the store. I love being part of their lives without having to sacrifice my own. What I don't love anymore is the idea that a woman isn't complete without a man. That happiness comes from finding someone else to fill the empty spaces inside you. What I've learned is that those spaces aren't empty at all. They're full of things I never had time to discover when I was busy being what someone else needed. Last month, I celebrated the 15th anniversary of my last breakup. Not because I'm bitter about Harold or any of the men who came before him, but because it was the day I stopped looking for someone to complete me and started becoming complete all by myself. I made myself a cake, German chocolate, my favorite, the kind Richard always said was too sweet. I lit a single candle and made a wish, not for love to find me, but for the wisdom to keep choosing myself every single day for however many days I have left. My friends still think I'm crazy. They see a woman who gave up on love at 76. What they're really seeing is a woman who finally figured out that the love she'd been looking for her whole life was never missing. It was just waiting for her to stop looking everywhere else and start looking in the mirror. I am 76 years old. I haven't had a boyfriend in 15 years. I have never been happier, more fulfilled, or more completely myself. If that makes me crazy, then I hope I never recover.